From Detroit's Gas Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn, Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, we'll look back at 60 years of the Wright Museum, unearthing overlooked histories,
celebrating the people who lived them and ensuring they're never forgotten.
Plus, Detroit's big downtown projects make headlines, but what about the smaller ones shaping daily life in the neighborhoods?
We'll talk about how small-scale development could give residents more say in their own city.
Also, college is more than books and lectures. It's a big leap into independence.
We'll learn about a program helping students land on their feet while grounding them in culture, community, and justice.
And from vacant lots to neighborhood storefronts, small-scale development could change how Detroit lives and breathes. We'll meet someone helping to transform the city, block to block.
But first, a raft of President Trump's expanded tariffs on imported goods took effect last week. The federal government is bringing in big money from tariff revenues, to the tune of $29 billion last month. Now, it's important to note that money is coming from us, Americans. Tariffs aren't just numbers in a trade deal. They're hidden costs baked into the price of almost everything we buy and sell. And they've become a point of contention and anxiety with President Trump's erratic maneuvers, announcing them, delaying them, increasing them, walking them back. He says his new tariffs aim to protect American industries. But here in Michigan, they could hit small businesses and big supply chains. Economists warn that the state's manufacturing base and retailers are especially vulnerable. That means higher costs for business owners, tougher choices on pricing, and potential sticker shock for many of us. So today, we're connecting the dots, from the global supply chain to the boutique sales floor. We're joined by Rachel Lutz, owner of the Peacock Room, a women's clothing and accessories boutique in Detroit. Rachel, welcome back to the Metro.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We also have Professor Jason Miller on the line. He's the interim chair of supply chain management at Michigan State University. Professor, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So, Rachel, I want to start with you. When you first heard about this latest round of tariffs, what went through your mind about your store and your customers?
To be honest, part of me was in disbelief. I thought that it was so extreme that it couldn't possibly actually go into effect. I thought that it would be walked back, as some policies from this administration have happened. Sometimes there's the shock value, and sometimes there's actually just no follow-through, but this did follow through. A lot of larger companies like Amazon, like major importers, Walmart, Target, a lot of those companies were poised to kind of buffer those early effects because they could import large bulk quantities of things before the tariffs went into effect. But small businesses don't have those logistical, supply chains. We don't have warehousing. So a lot of small businesses were, I would say, disproportionately affected by these tariffs.
Now, Professor Miller, I want to take a step back for a moment. Michigan exports about $60 billion worth of goods every year, nearly half of that in vehicles and auto parts. So let's explain what's in this new tariff package, which products are targeted, and why our economy is so sensitive to these kinds of trade policy changes.
Yeah, and so we can even see this show up in the auto data right now, and that through the first 6 months of the year, Michigan auto factories have exported roughly $600 million fewer finished vehicles than what we did for the first 6 months of 2024. The key challenge that we face is not only we're very auto-centric and essentially anything not compliant with USMCA is being subject to tariff, but Canada, for example, is by far the biggest destination of finished vehicles that we produce, and not too surprisingly, the Canadians are not too happy with us at the moment, and so they're drawing down on purchases of U.S. goods, motor vehicles being one of the top.
Okay, now let's go back to you, Rachel, because I want to talk about the products in your store that are most exposed to tariff-driven price increases, whether they're imported directly or they have imported components. Because, yes, we're talking about vehicles and auto parts, but you're someone who's affected, but not someone who people automatically think about as the owner of a boutique.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're talking about a durable good like a vehicle, that's a once in a long time purchase. But people consume clothing, like I carry at the Peacock Room, pretty regularly, sometimes multiple times a season. So we do carry a mix of both imported and U.S. and Canadian made products. This isn't just affecting the imported things I have, though. This is also affecting my American suppliers. I have a few suppliers that are based here in the U.S., and I'd like to remind your listeners that 97% of clothing sold in the U.S. is made overseas. 97%.
That's a wild statistic,
it's
Rachel.
Wild. So I carry part of the 3%, the top tier quality clothing that's made here in the U.S. or in North America. And those suppliers are affected as well. So, for example, I carry a brand called Karen Kane. Karen Kane gets a lot of the fabrics that they manufacture with from China, zippers, buttons, things like that. There's a few Canadian companies that I carry that are made in Montreal, but some of those companies, to compete in the global marketplace, have started making some of their clothing in China. For example, sweaters, jackets, denim products. A lot of those come from overseas, even if the rest of the company's goods are made in North America. I carry a local Detroit jewelry manufacturer, Rebel Nell. And Rebel Nell, even though it's made in Michigan, made in Detroit, their silver prices for the raw material have gone through the roof. And it's not as if they can suddenly switch to a domestic source for these things. That's what's also confusing about all this to a lot of consumers is they say, well, why don't you just start making more things in the U.S.? And it's very complicated, I'm sure, as Jason can go into more detail on. So, if we've already shipped equipment overseas, you can't really reshore the equipment like booms. And even if you did have the equipment, you can't magically wave a magic wand and have a workforce that knows how to work on that equipment or manufacture certain goods. Things like that could take years to come back into the supply chain domestically.
Professor Miller, can I have you build off of what Rachel is saying right now about the complexities of all this, how long it is going to take for us for normal folks to really see some benefits here of tariffs?
So I'm very skeptical that there will really be any benefits from these tariffs based on a huge body of academic research that really hammers home this point that was just being made, that by tariffing so many of the inputs, you make it more difficult for domestic production to take place. And so as an example, if you wanted to have a large-scale increase in apparel production in the United States, you would need a tremendous amount of apparel manufacturing equipment. Most of that is made overseas. You would need all of the textiles as well. The U.S. textile industry, once we started to offshore apparel production really in the 90s, that also died down. And so the challenge is it turns into a chicken and the egg, in that who wants to build a textile mill to produce textiles that are generic when if a tariff was dropped, all of a sudden you would be completely outcompeted by Chinese manufacturers, which it's very important to emphasize because I think we have a bias in this country. Made in China in the apparel and textile space often means some of the best made goods in the world. And so,
Professor Miller, forgive me for jumping in. I just want to have Rachel sound off on that for a moment as well, because I know that she agrees with you.
So it's very interesting. I've actually been to China. I went in 2016 because I wanted to see where most of our things are made. I also wanted to dispel this myth to a lot of Americans that Chinese goods or the Chinese folks making these goods, manufacturing these goods, are somehow inferior. It's kind of ethnocentric of us to assume that just because something is made in China or made in Asia, it's of lower quality. there are sweatshops in the United States that we don't want to acknowledge, and there are excellent manufacturing facilities in China. It's really hard to find responsible sourcing. It's very opaque in my industry, especially the fashion industry. So I probably have gone well above and beyond what most boutique owners will do to make sure that they're supporting responsible manufacturing practices, but I think it's very important. I do have a Chinese designer, Samuel Dong. He was born in Hong Kong. He's now a Canadian citizen, lives in Montreal. His company is based in Secaucus, New Jersey, in the United States. He sources a lot of fabrics both from overseas and, I should say China and also the Paris fabric market. But he has a family-owned factory. It's not like he's jumping around from factory to factory every fashion cycle. He has a consistent quality control, good product, consistent workforce that's like family to him. So we also need to dispel this myth that just because it's made in China means that it's inferior. Conversely, we do pay sometimes exploitative labor wages here in the United States because of our immigration policy. So it's very complex, especially the labor part of this. Now, one thing that I can be proud of is that the United States, Canada, the European Union, certain countries or certain regions have tougher laws regarding environmental practices, labor practices. That's something that Americans can feel good about if something is made domestically or in a country that values those things and also has the proper enforcement of those laws. That's something that typically aligns with us in terms of our values as Americans.
Professor Miller, I want to bring you back because I'm wondering where you think that this negative connotation that is so deeply entrenched with the words made in China, where does it come from?
So historically, we always call this sort of quality upgrading in exports, is when countries sort of start down an export path, they tend to produce relatively simple goods where labor cost matters a lot more and quality may matter a little less. And then as time goes on and those manufacturing skills build up, the diversity of goods as well as the quality tends to improve. And so I think for a lot of individuals, they're sort of anchored to, when China really did start exporting substantially in the early 1990s, and quality was not what it was today. It's the same way that if you look back in the 1950s and 1960s, the phrase made in Japan denoted low quality. But by the 1970s, when you had Toyota and Honda producing the best vehicles in the world, that sort of perception diminished. So I think a lot of it is sort of this anchoring that took place that we just haven't, as a nation, come to realize that for many types of goods, made in China means the same thing in terms of quality as made in the United States.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guests are Rachel Lutz, owner of the Peacock Room, a women's clothing and accessories boutique in Detroit, and Professor Jason Miller. He's the interim chair of supply chain management at Michigan State University. We're talking about the local effects of President Trump's tariffs. A large expansion of those tariffs went into effect last week. Now, Rachel, one thing that I've been wondering when it comes to local business owners is the dilemma of how you decide whether to absorb extra costs or pass them on to customers, especially in a city like Detroit, where a lot of us are particularly price conscious. Have you considered telling customers directly that prices may go up because of tariffs, for example?
I mean, prices may go up because of tariffs. We haven't raised any of our prices yet because we always want to remain competitive. We price match at the Peacock Room, so we never want people to feel like they would pay more in a boutique than they would online. So we are still price matching, what other retailers have. But it's important to me to still carry products that will be affected by tariffs. I have jewelry in my store for $200 made in the USA out of fine materials, but we also have jewelry for $12, under $20. Those tend to be the pieces that are going to be imported. It's really hard to serve a city like Detroit, where we're such a mixed income area, and make people feel not welcome in the store because we only carry, top tier or luxury products. Price, mix has always been really important to me. So we will not be raising any prices on, the name brands that people basically will shop online, but they may see incremental, smaller increases on less expensive things. Those are primarily the imported things. It's really hard for a retailer to raise their prices, especially in this competitive environment. We're already competing with Amazon and fast fashion.
Right.
That's a pretty tough thing. So here we are after, a recession, after going through a pandemic. A lot of retailers have not recovered from that challenge to brick and mortar yet, and yet here we are with these tariffs now. So it's an ongoing challenge, and these conversations are happening nearly daily with my vendors and with other retailers. So it's complicated.
This has me thinking about so-called adjustment costs. Professor Miller, your research looks at these. These are the resources businesses spend reworking their supply chains. I'm wondering how those costs might look for a boutique retailer compared to, let's say, a large manufacturer.
Yeah, and it's really going to depend by industry, and also very much, and this was just hit on, what are demand conditions right now that you're facing? So, for example, in U.S. electrical equipment production, which is doing phenomenally well right now because of the power demands for data centers, we're starting to see much more inflationary effects because a lot of the inputs used in electrical equipment are imported. They're now subject to tariffs, and manufacturers know they can pass those costs on to their customers because demand is strong. And so it really depends industry by industry basis. One of the key things that's emerging right now is for price-sensitive consumer goods, we're having to see retailers and wholesalers absorb more of the tariffs. They're not passing it on to customers, but that means less profit, so less to invest in employees or changing assortments and things of that sort. Whereas for more what we would call producer goods, we're seeing substantially more evidence of the costs of tariffs being passed through. That's often because substitution is much less feasible. And so we saw, as an example, beverages imported from the European Union have fallen in price by about 10% for what the importers are paying. That means the exporters in the EU are fully absorbing those tariffs. In contrast, even though many of the metals we import from the EU are subject to 50% tariffs, those prices that our importers have paid have not fallen in the slightest because they're specialty items, and at that point the importers are stuck absorbing those tariffs, and then they have to decide whether to pass those on to their buyers.
And I would agree. We have been absorbing a lot of these tariff costs extra. The retailers have been absorbing them if the vendors haven't been. I have a Canadian vendor that's been absorbing a 25 to 35% tariff since the spring, and that's not sustainable for them. And in the meantime, we have been absorbing remaining tariff prices and avoiding raising prices.
Rachel, this does not sound sustainable, so it has me wondering, what's your contingency plan if these tariffs stay in place for the next year or if they even expand?
Well, I'm hoping that eventually political pressure may change some of these policies. There was a recent study that came out of Yale that said that American households, this has cost us $2,400 each American household, these tariffs. So I'm hoping that they won't be going on for years, these policies. In the meantime, a lot of retailers that I've talked to are really just trying to focus on keeping their head above water before the tariffs had come along. So it's really hard for a lot of small retailers to strategize around this. Again, we don't have the massive supply chain ease that a lot of these bigger box retailers have. So really, I think that small businesses hopefully will continue to do the best they can to know their community, know how to serve it, get them the products that they need and want, and offer them at a price that the community feels is appropriate and they can bear. But with tariffs, that just keeps making it harder.
Rachel Lutz is owner of the Peacock Room. That's a women's clothing and accessories boutique in Detroit. Professor Jason Miller is the interim chair of supply chain management at Michigan State University. Rachel, Professor Miller, thank you both so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having us.
Yep, thank you.
Up next, an emotionally charged city council meeting in Highland Park has raised important questions about city government processes. How do vetoes really work? And what does a parliamentarian actually do? The Detroit Documenters will help answer those questions. That's next on the Metro. Stay with us.